Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. If you search Google quotes on Google, you find stuff like this. If the answer isn't on Google, it's not even a question. It's warped, but it also tells you how big Google is. Bigger than governments, richer than countries. Now, the US government wants to break it up. It says Google search is a monopoly. It should be broken. If that happens, it will be unprecedented. But how does this work? And what does it mean for other tech giants? We'll discuss all of that. In India, another tech giant is making news for offering 20,000 rupees as starting salary to engineering graduates. Is this a case of techies being underskilled or underpaid? Maybe both. In Japan, the Prime Minister is stepping down and exposing the political rot in the country. In Israel, America is handing out both criticism for the war and weapons to fight it. In Ukraine, the Battle of Kursk could prove to be the turning point in the war. We'll tell you how. In Thailand, the controversial court has dismissed another prime minister. In Myanmar, China's top diplomat is visiting and pushing the junta towards a ceasefire. In the UK, the infamous British Museum broke the law, leading to thefts in the Museum of Loot. In Africa, the Mpox epidemic is spreading and breaching international borders. And what are your thoughts about a cat tax? We'll tell you about it and other bizarre taxes. The headlines first. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi meets Foxconn's chairman. The discussions focused on the Apple supplies investment plans in India. Prime Minister Modi also highlighted the opportunities in India for futuristic sectors. Taiwanese giant Foxconn is the world's largest electronics contract manufacturer. Kiribati votes in a key election. The polls are a test of its pro-China government. The Pacific Island nation broke its ties with Taiwan in 2019. Kiribati is strategically important, but the US and China have been vying for influence over it. South Sudan mulls holding long-delayed elections. Its president meets political leaders to discuss the issue. The elections have been tentatively set for December this year. 13 years ago, South Sudan got its independence from Sudan, but the world's youngest country is yet to go to the polls. EasyJet cancels more than 200 flights to and from Portugal. This comes ahead of a strike by its cabin crew based in the country. The three-day strike was announced in late July. The crew members of the British budget airline are demanding better working conditions. And fast fashion has a dirty secret. South Korean authorities find toxic substances in Shein, Temu and AliExpress products. Possible carcinogens were found in shoes and nail polish. These Chinese giants are under scrutiny in many countries. It's because of their business practices and safety standards. Our lead story tonight is about Google. Will Google be broken up? The search giant is in the crosshairs of the US government and the stakes couldn't be higher. Google is worth well over $2 trillion. As of April this year, more than 2 billion people were using Google and its products. The company reaches every continent on this planet. It has more than 70 offices, 70 offices in 50 countries. By the end of 2023, Google had more than 180,000 employees. It is more powerful than governments and richer than many countries. Google has been among America's crown jewels. But now the US government feels that this company is too big to regulate, and they have a point. Wherever there is internet, there is Google. For a lot of people, internet means Google. It is the only search engine they use. But Google's wealth comes from a wide range of products. Search is only a part of it. There is the Chrome browser, there's YouTube for videos, Gmail for email, Google Drive for storage, Google Maps for navigation, and the Android operating systems for smartphones. It's a long list. All these products together make Google worth over $2 trillion. So what happens if the company is broken up? Each of these products, Chrome, YouTube, Google Drive, Gmail, Maps, Android, they may be split from the parent company and siphoned into separate entities. That is one possibility. Business units like Android and the Chrome browser could be divested. Everything else remains as it is. But whatever is decided, Google will be hollowed out. Whichever way this goes, Google will be hollowed out. I know you have questions about this, like why is this happening? Why does the US government want to break up Google? It started with a lawsuit. Google was sued by the US government, by their Justice Department. They said Google is a monopoly and it is using all its power to control the market for search. How? By paying off other internet companies like Apple, the maker of iPhones. Google paid a lot of money to Apple to make sure that Google search is the default search engine on its devices. So when you use an Apple product, when you pick up your iPhone or your iPad and you open the Safari browser to look for something, all its searches are directed to Google. Similarly, Google paid off Mozilla too. Mozilla makes the Firefox internet browser. So Google targeted Firefox to make sure that all the searches from Firefox came to Google. Now, we don't have the exact figure, but reports say that Google paid billions of dollars to these players. Now, the US Justice Department says that Google violated America's antitrust laws. So they took the matter to court, and the judge agreed. He declared that Google is a monopolist. So it was a win for the US government. Now, the Justice Department wants to use this opportunity to enforce antitrust laws. They want to take action and check Google's monopoly. Of course, the company will fight this in court. And this is what is expected to happen. A judge will finally decide if and how Google will be broken up.
Well, Google is going to appeal, and we don't know how long that's going to take. What we do know is going to happen is there's going to be what's called a remedy phase. That's the next act in this legal showdown, is what's known as a remedy phase, and the first hearing on that is September 6th. But that process is going to take months to happen too. It could take a year just to do that. That's where the judge is going to decide what kind of changes must be imposed to make a more competitive landscape.
At the center of this case are America's antitrust laws. Now, what are antitrust laws? These are laws that regulate how goods and services are sold in the market. They ensure that a balance is maintained, that the market remains fair. For every player who wants to enter a business, the market should be fair. There should be a level playing field. Let's try and understand this through a packet of chips. Imagine this scenario. There's a famous brand of chips that everyone likes. It is available widely. It has a range of flavors. Whenever you go to your local supermarket, you find only this brand of chips. It is on all the shelves. You may not even realize or question this. Why does the supermarket keep only this specific brand of chips? What about the other brands? There's a good chance you won't even think about this. After all, it's just a packet of chips, and you like this brand. So when you want to have chips, you just buy what is available. But here is what you don't know. The maker of these chips struck a deal with the supermarket. They asked the supermarket owner to only sell their brand of chips and to keep the competition away. So they bought all the shelves for chips in the supermarket. In exchange, the supermarket owner gets a slice of the profits. That's how they rigged the market. Now imagine if a new chips brand wants to enter this market. It's a startup that makes healthy chips. They taste the same or even better. And they come without preservatives, maybe. But you won't be able to get your hands on this brand, this new brand, because your nearest supermarket won't keep them. After all, they're making money from that secret deal they struck. And this startup, this new company, doesn't have the money to outbid the big company. Such practices are more common than you would imagine. And that is why we need antitrust laws to make sure that everyone gets a fair chance to compete in an open market. More importantly, you, the customer, gets more choices. So Google, through its deals with Apple and Mozilla, tried to do something similar. It tried to make Google search the default search engine. And it used its money to block any potential challengers. Basically, Google wanted to rig the market in their favor. And now it faces the prospect of being dismantled into smaller entities. That would be the harshest punishment. Of course, Google can challenge all of this in higher courts, and the US government may end up resorting to a less severe punishment. They could force Google to share more data with competitors. They could enforce measures to slow down Google. They could also make it easier for other companies to compete. Basically, the government will try to level the playing field. And this is very important. The world will be watching how this case unfolds. Also, other tech giants like Apple, they will be watching this. Apple is already facing a lawsuit over iPhones. This is about how the Apple ecosystem works. They don't allow rival apps or software to run on Apple devices.
And as outlined in our complaint, we allege that Apple has consolidated its monopoly power, not by making its own products better, but by making other products worse.
A guilty verdict against Google may have a bearing on the case against Apple too, and these cases could have a domino effect on the tech industry at large, especially the big players like Meta, the parent company of Facebook, and Microsoft and Amazon. Global regulators are challenging these companies. They want these companies to be broken up because they're too powerful. The case against Google could set the precedent. They need to move forward. Are you an engineer looking for a job? If yes, tech giant Cognizant has an exciting offer for you. An offer too good to be true. They're offering freshers 2.5 lakh rupees. Awesome, right? But hold off on applying, because it's not 2.5 lakh rupees per month. It is 2.5 lakh rupees per annum, which comes to around 20,000 rupees per month, or $240. And don't forget things like provident fund and insurance. After that, it will probably be less. Now, I know what you're thinking. It must be hard times for Cognizant. The company must be struggling to turn a profit. Well, wrong again. Cognizant's profits are up 22% compared to last year. They made $566 million in the second quarter, and I'm talking profits only. $566 million. Yet, what are they offering to new employees? Less than 20,000 rupees per month. That barely covers expenses. Cognizant's India headquarters is in the city of Chennai. Now look at the average cost of living there, between 19 and 32,000 rupees. And we are talking about basic survival, no luxuries, no holidays, no investments. And this is after getting an engineering degree. Compare this to other jobs. A driver in India gets paid 25,000 rupees. That's the average, 25,000 for a driver. A house help gets 20,000 rupees on average. And just to be clear, we are not demeaning these jobs. Every bit of labor has its own dignity. And yes, these jobs do not offer upward mobility, so a driver gets paid the same over many years. But an engineer gets promotions and pay hikes. Having said that, look at the skill difference. Look at the investment that you're putting in. An engineering course lasts 4 years. It costs anywhere between 3 to 20 lakh rupees, depending on where you've gone to college. So ideally, you would expect better wages. Then why is it not happening? There are broadly two reasons. One is oversupply. India produces around 2 million engineers every year, but the economy cannot absorb all of them. In simpler words, there aren't enough jobs. Plus, having a degree is not enough. You must have the skills. Look at this report from 2020. It says 80% of Indian engineers are unemployable. 80%. Only 2.5% of them had AI skills. Around 5% had basic programming skills. The rest of them may get hired, but their wages will be quite low. And that's one reason for the low salary packages. The second reason is the corporate culture. And it's not just Cognizant. Let's look at other IT giants in India. TCS used to pay freshers around 3.2 lakh rupees in 2013. 3.2 lakh rupees in 2013. That's what TCS used to pay. How much do they pay now? Exactly the same. Infosys used to pay around 3 lakh rupees in 2013. Today they pay between 3 and 5 lakhs. Wipro is the same story. 3.3 lakh rupees in 2020. 3.5 lakh rupees in 2024. So wages haven't changed in a decade. The rupee's value has fallen, prices have gone up, rent has gone up, yet the salary remains the same. But that's not the case with the top bosses. Their story is very different. Cognizant CEO is the highest paid in India, the highest paid CEO in India. Last year, he took home around 186 crore rupees, which is more than $20 million. And why not? He's expanding the business in India. In fact, Cognizant opened a new campus in Hyderabad today. So the company is growing under his leadership, which is a good thing. The problem is the benefits do not trickle down. When profits rise, shareholders and top bosses jump in. But when profits fall, only the employees suffer. Some get laid off, others get salary cuts. Again, this problem is not limited to India. It's probably worse in Western countries. So the question is, what can we do about it? Some solutions must come from the government. If engineers lack certain skills, you must plug that, either with new skilling courses or changes in syllabus or new types of educational institutions. Take the IITs, for example. The first IIT was founded in the year 1950. The idea was to create a new class of leaders in technology, people who could build an independent India. And that bet paid off. Secondly, we need an attitude change. Demanding more salary is not a crime. It is not disloyalty. It is simply looking out for yourself. At the same time, we need to keep improving. A degree alone is not enough nowadays, evidently. You must keep upskilling. You must learn new things. If not, the world will leave you behind. Now let's look at Japan. Their prime minister is stepping down. It's this man, Fumio Kishida. Today he made the announcement. Kishida belongs to the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, or the LDP. In September, they will hold a contest to choose the party leader, and Kishida will not run for that.
The most obvious first step to show that the Liberal Democratic Party will change is for me to step aside. I will not run for the upcoming presidential election. I will continue to support the new leader who will be elected through the presidential election as a comrade.
So this is how it works. Kishida steps down, a new party leader is elected. He or she becomes Japan's prime minister, but it raises a few questions. Like, why is Kishida stepping down? Who will replace him? Why will Japan have 4 prime ministers in 4 years? What is wrong with the country's politics? Let's look at Kishida first. He is 67 years old. He belongs to a family of politicians. He served as foreign minister from 2012 to 2015. In fact, he is Japan's longest serving foreign minister. In 2021, he became prime minister. He succeeded Yoshihide Suga. He served 3 years in office, and those were tough years. There was the pandemic, 2 wars, the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and multiple scandals in Tokyo. Kishida vowed to tackle Japan's demographic crisis. He touted his new capitalism policies. None of it worked. Japan's economy suffered. Its growth spluttered. The yen plummeted, and Kishida's ratings went down with it. When he took office, his rating stood at around 50%. Last month, it was down to 15.5%, the lowest for any leader in a decade. Many blamed his lack of charisma for all of this. So Kishida finally chose to resign. In theory, he could continue until 2025, but that wouldn't have helped anyone. So they'll have to find a replacement now. Who will that be? A lot of names are doing the rounds. The first is Shigeru Ishiba. He's a former defense minister, also the Secretary General of the ruling party, the LDP. Ishiba is seen as the strongest contender right now. But there are others too, like Digital Minister Taro Kono, the LDP Secretary General, Japan's Economic Security Minister, and Foreign Minister. They're also in the race. Now, if any of these two win, Japan will have its first female prime minister, the first ever. The country got its first prime minister in 1885. Since then, 64 men have served as PM, 64 prime ministers, all men. In 1955, the Liberal Democrats took control of the parliament, and since then they have pretty much ruled Japan continuously. The same party has been in power for almost 70 years now. The LDP gave Japan its longest serving prime minister. That was Shinzo Abe. He ruled from 2012 to 2020. Now, 8 years may not sound like a long period of time, but in Japanese politics it is. Most of their prime ministers last less than 3 years. Fumio Kishida was in office for 35 months. He's Japan's 8th longest serving PM, so the bar is quite low. His predecessor, Suga, was in office for a year. And that tells you a thing or two about Japanese politics. The LDP may have ruled for decades, but people don't seem to trust the party anymore. There have been multiple scandals like the siphoning of campaign funds, corruption allegations, and the party is linked to fringe groups. Plus, there's discontent over Japan's declining population. The economy, like we said, is struggling, and the debt is rising. The problem is, none of this shows at the ballot box because Japan often has a low voter turnout and the opposition is quite weak. So despite all of these issues, the LDP sails through. It keeps winning elections. This time, though, the outcome may be different. Japan's political crisis is at a precipice. The LDP lost 3 by-elections in April. The general election is due next year in 2025, so it's a moment of reckoning for the ruling party. If the LDP does not clean up its act, it could lose control over a country it has ruled for 7 decades.
Finalizing a deal for an immediate ceasefire with hostage release in Gaza.
We'll see what Iran does. We'll see what happens.
It's the same old story in West Asia. The US asks Israel to de-escalate, then follows it up with a massive arms shipment. The latest one is worth $20 billion. We're talking about lethal weapons here. 50 F-15 fighter jets, advanced air-to-air missiles, 120mm tank ammunition and explosive mortars. It's the mother of all mixed signals. Washington keeps asking Israel to stop fighting, to sign a ceasefire with Hamas, yet they pump more and more weapons into Israel. This shipment will take time, though. The deliveries will be made over many years. The first cash is expected by 2026. But look at the timing. On Tuesday, Israel bombed Deir el-Balah. It's a city in central Gaza. It was hosting hundreds of Palestinian refugees. Just look at the destruction. Children covered in blood, babies killed in their sleep, that too when the world marked 75 years of the Geneva Convention, a convention that upholds humanity during war. Israel is not just ignoring those rules, it is tearing them up for the rest of the world to see. More than 40,000 Gazans have been killed since October. That's almost 130 deaths per day. The numbers alone will make you angry, but look at the stories behind them. I'll tell you about an incident from yesterday. A Gazan father had gone out to get birth certificates for his twins. The babies were born just 4 days ago. So the babies and their mother stayed back. The father went out to get the birth certificates. In that time, their building was bombed by Israel. When the father returned, everyone was dead. His wife, his mother-in-law, and his 4-day-old twins.
I went to get the birth certificates. I got 2 babies, twins. I got a call telling me that the house you are staying in got bombed. People from the neighborhood called me. My wife is gone, with my 2 babies and my mother-in-law.
Why is Israel continuing this? Almost every country wants them to stop. Families of hostages want them to stop. So why isn't Benjamin Netanyahu listening? Because he doesn't have to. You see, only one country's opinion truly matters to Israel, and that country is the United States of America. Joe Biden may criticize Netanyahu all he wants, but he's still sending weapons. For all the so-called outrage, guess how many weapons Biden has withheld? 1 shipment, that's it. Same with regional tensions. Israel has attacked Iran, Lebanon, and Syria. What gives them this confidence? Again, the United States of America. Biden has moved more firepower into West Asia. He's also promised to defend Israel if attacked. So why should Netanyahu be scared? The truth is, Biden does not have any real red lines. Not civilians, not Rafah, not even 4-day-old babies. Which is why Israel's war rolls on. You may have seen the missiles and tank ammunitions being fired. A lot of that comes from the US. Let's look at the numbers now. The US Congress has approved a military package for Israel that's worth $17 billion. In addition, there are smaller sales. You see, packages have a certain amount above a certain amount must be submitted to Congress. Anything below that amount skirts under the radar. And that's what Biden is doing. Reports say that he has approved more than 100 small sales since October 7th. These could be between $25 and $300 million. And what sort of weapons are these? Artillery shells, howitzers, tank ammunition, guided bombs, Hellfire missiles and rockets. We are talking thousands of these items. Now, Israel says these weapons are only used in self-defense, but ground reports suggest otherwise. In the month of June, Israel bombed a refugee camp in central Gaza. Analysis showed that the bomb was American-made. And we are not military experts here, but bombing refugees is not self-defense. Yet there is no criticism from the United States. And the same America wants Israel to cease fire.
The United States' overall goal remains to turn the temperature down in the region, deter and defend against any future attacks, and avoid regional conflict. That starts with finalizing a deal for an immediate ceasefire with hostage release in Gaza. We need to get this over the finish line.
The US wants Israel to cease fire, but they're not willing to apply pressure. Forget pressure, they can't even stop sending weapons, and nobody is supposed to question any of this. Consider what happened at a recent Kamala Harris rally. A few protesters managed to sneak in. They accused her of supporting Israel's war in Gaza. Listen to the response.
He intends to end the Affordable Care Act. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking.
The same Harris will also talk about protecting civilians, about signing a ceasefire deal. But if you expose their hypocrisy, you are a Trump supporter. We don't know when this war will end or how it will end. But when the history books are written, it should make one thing clear. Hamas started this war, but it wasn't just Israel that killed 40,000 Palestinians. It was Israel and the United States. Now let's look at the other war, the Russia-Ukraine war. On Tuesday, Ukraine launched drone attacks on Russia. They fired at Kursk and other regions. Moscow took down 117 of these drones. But that isn't their biggest problem at the moment. Ukraine took control of Kursk on the 6th of August. 1 week later, they're still holding on to it. Russia is scrambling to respond. They haven't been able to stop the incursion. What does this mean for the war? Is the Battle of Kursk a turning point? Will Ukraine continue to hold on to Russian territory? Our next report tells you.
It was the summer of 1943. Kursk was at the center of a major battle. Nazi and Soviet troops clashed. Both sides suffered casualties. But it was a turning point. The Soviets won the Battle of Kursk and ended Hitler's dream of conquering Russia. 80 years later, German tanks are back in Kursk. It's at the center of another battle, Russia versus Ukraine. On Wednesday, Moscow downed 117 Ukrainian drones. They fired into Kursk and other regions. Russia shot down the missiles. But some hit Russian military bases. Meanwhile, Ukrainian troops are advancing into the region, and President Zelensky has promised them all the help that's needed.
Please have a look. If you're lacking something, we can deliver it to you. I understand that while our partners' packages are being handed over to us, it is not easy. But if there's a way to reinforce our troops at these sections, please pay attention to it.
The offensive in Kursk began on August 6th. Ukrainian tanks rolled into the region. By August 8th, civilians were evacuated. Tens of thousands of them left their homes. Russian President Putin called it a major provocation. And by the 12th of August, Kyiv claimed it had captured 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory.
As of today, 74 settlements are under our control. There are ongoing battles along the entire front line. Despite the high intensity of combat activity, the situation is under our control. We are continuing with the operation.
This is the biggest foreign incursion in Russia in decades. But Moscow has really struggled with its response. They used missiles and drones, hit the Ukrainian army with airstrikes, but nothing has worked. Ukrainian forces are still in control. So Kremlin tried to downplay any advances. Russian commanders say the Kursk front has stabilized. But that didn't stop Moscow from raising the issue at the UNSC.
They go on repeating that Ukraine has the legal right to defend itself, while referencing the attacks on civilians in the Kursk region.
Ukraine has launched raids into Russia before, but this is different. Kyiv maintains that even after a week, it still controls a large part of Kursk. So the question is, what will it do with it? Rolling into Kursk was a gamble for Ukraine. Its foreign ministry says it doesn't want to permanently hold on to the territory. But right now it has two options. It can hold the Kursk region and bargain for territory that it has lost to Moscow. But that could be difficult, given it may have to face the might of the full Russian war machine. The other option is retreating, but that may be seen as pointless by many. Either way, Ukraine has a choice to make. The 1943 Battle of Kursk helped end the Second World War. Will the 2024 one become a turning point in the Russia-Ukraine war?
Our next story is from Thailand. It's a country in Southeast Asia. It's the second largest economy in the region, thanks in large part to its tourism industry. Thailand is also home to about 70 million people, making it a major regional player. But this critical Southeast Asian power is facing political turmoil. Today, Thailand's Prime Minister was ousted. His name is Srettha Thavisin. He became Prime Minister last August. He was just about to complete 1 year in charge, but before he could, he was kicked out. Now, this wasn't a Bangladesh-like scenario. There were no protests or uprisings. Instead, Srettha was forced to step down by a court, Thailand's infamous constitutional court. Srettha is not the first to face this court's ire. In fact, he has become the fourth prime minister to be dismissed, the fourth in the last 16 years. That's once every 4 years on average. Thailand's constitutional court works faster than election cycles in the country, and it arguably has more of an impact on the country's political landscape. We'll go into details about the court and its antics, but before that, let's look at how Srettha was ousted, starting with today's verdict that brought him down.
The court has found by a 5-4 decision that the role of the first accused as prime minister has ended according to Constitution Article 170, paragraphs 1-4, due to a lack of honesty and lack of qualifications as per Constitution Article 160, paragraphs 1-4. The individual has also exhibited behavior that grossly breached ethical standards, which is prohibited according to Constitution Article 160.
The first accused was Srettha Thavisin. He apparently exhibited behavior that grossly breached ethical standards. So what was his heinous crime? Well, Srettha appointed a controversial lawyer to his cabinet, a lawyer who was sentenced to 6 months in jail back in 2008 for trying to bribe a judge. The lawyer was definitely a controversial choice. It led to some political uproar, so he left the post within a week. But the damage had been done. Some of Prime Minister Srettha's rivals took advantage of this controversy. They filed a complaint with Thailand's constitutional court and let the court work its dark magic. Now, less than 3 months later, the Prime Minister has been dismissed.
I respect the decision of the Constitutional Court, but I want to affirm that throughout my 1 year or almost a year tenure as Prime Minister, I have tried to do everything correctly. I am saddened by the fact that I am seen as a Prime Minister without morality, which I affirm I am not such a person. But when the judiciary has made a decision, I have to accept it.
Now, some of you might think that this was a good thing, Thailand's court taking a no-nonsense approach and ousting a corrupt prime minister. Well, before you start showering praise, let's look at this court's track record. I mentioned that it has ousted 4 prime ministers in all. All of them were from the same political party, Srettha's party. It's called the Pheu Thai Party. That's its name now, but it has undergone a number of name changes over the years because it keeps getting dissolved by the courts. The party keeps getting dissolved by the courts. This fate is not unique to the Pheu Thai party. Another party has also experienced it, and it happened just last week. It was the Move Forward party. This is the party that technically won Thailand's last election. But the same party was dissolved last week, and its top leaders were barred from politics by the very same constitutional court. Now, if you start tracking this court's actions, a pattern appears. Every populist party in Thailand, every pro-democracy political outfit in the country somehow gets disqualified by Thailand's constitutional court. But the same court seems fine with military coups. It has no problem with dictatorships. The court even allows the dictators to transition into prime ministers and then breach Thailand's term limits. But whenever there's a popular, democratically elected party, suddenly the Thai court is all business. And there's a reason for this. You see, Thailand has experienced more coups than any other country in modern history. The Thai military has always held the reins of power, often with backing from the country's monarchy. And this military royalist nexus is loath to give away any real control. That's why every so often we see political instability in Thailand in the form of judicial crackdown or outright coups. Thailand's military always keeps political parties on the back foot, preventing any meaningful change in the country. Sretha is the latest prime minister to get outmaneuvered. Now, his party will scramble to find a replacement from a very limited pool. Prime ministerial options are limited in Thailand to a list of people declared before the last election. So Sretha was one of the Pheu Thai party's 3 nominees. Now they have 2 people left. All other potential prime ministers are backed by Thailand's military. Thai politics basically is a game of endurance, where the military and the courts bide their time waiting for a chance to strike. Sretha messed up, and now he has been ousted. So who will be the next contender in Thailand's Game of Thrones? We'll be watching. And the political chaos in Thailand is unfolding just before an important visit. Wang Yi was supposed to travel to Thailand later this week. That's China's foreign minister. He is on a tour of Southeast Asia. He started today with Myanmar. Wang Yi is meeting the top military leadership in Myanmar. Remember, the junta is in power in Myanmar. They led a coup 3 years ago, and they have been ruling since. Over the past few months, they've been facing challenges from rebel groups. They've lost control of a military base on the China-Myanmar border. The rebels have taken over. And Beijing is not happy with the generals. Throughout this conflict, China has tried to play mediator, and now it is pushing the generals to accept a ceasefire. But will the junta agree? Our next report tells you more.
It's a visit that's got the world's attention. Wang Yi is visiting Myanmar. He's supposed to meet Min Aung Hlaing, the country's military leader. The circumstances in Myanmar perhaps made this sit-down a necessary one. Myanmar's military junta has suffered a big setback. They lost control of a key military base in Shan. The rebels have taken it over. Myanmar's soldiers couldn't defend their positions. The rebels overpowered them. So ultimately, they had to withdraw. The losses in Shan are worrying for Beijing. Shan is a border state in northern Myanmar. It shares a boundary border with China. Shan is crucial for the border trade between the 2 neighbors. It's also vital for Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. So this is a security nightmare for China.
China pays great attention to the situation in northern Myanmar. We have been urging relevant parties in Myanmar to adhere to dialogue and consultation, end the fighting as soon as possible, resolve differences by peaceful means, and avoid escalation of the situation. In particular, they must not endanger the Chinese border, border residents, and companies and personnel of Chinese projects in Myanmar.
Myanmar's military junta has been trying to secure Beijing's support to fight the rebels. In return, the generals have offered economic concessions, like the Myitson Dam project. It was suspended more than 10 years ago. This was after a massive public protest. But in May this year, the junta decided to revive it. As per the original plan, the 6,000 megawatt dam was supposed to be built in northern Myanmar, with financial backing from China. The project is worth $3.6 billion, and 90% of the power generated from this dam would be exported to China. But Beijing wants more from the junta. It's demanding a quick ceasefire between the rebels and the junta. Beijing had brokered one in January, but it fell apart in July. A new round of talks was scheduled for the same month, but the junta boycotted the meeting. Beijing has also been pushing the generals to step aside and make way for an interim leader. But the military has been less forthcoming on that front. Wang Yi could push the regime and extract more concessions during his trip. But without an end to the civil war, any promises made by the generals could end up being meaningless.
Our next story is from the UK. It's about the British Museum, the world's largest hoard of stolen artefacts, which is shamelessly on display in central London. Now, some of you might remember what happened last year. The British Museum made this announcement. It admitted to the world that some of its loot had been stolen. Irony aside, the news shocked the world. We realized that our stolen heritage was now lost. About 2,000 priceless artifacts were gone, 1,500 had been stolen, parts of 350 artifacts had been removed, and about 140 were still in the museum, but they were damaged. The news led to outrage across the globe. What had the British looters told us? What was their justification for keeping our priceless treasures? They said it was for protection. The British Museum's state-of-the-art facilities would better protect the goods that colonizers had looted. That was the justification, so that they wouldn't have to give back our artifacts. But this myth unraveled spectacularly last August. The British Museum announced the theft and was on the back foot. It launched a recovery mission and an investigation into the thefts. The recovery mission is still ongoing. The museum has not revealed the specifics of what was stolen. It says most of the objects were from Rome and Greece, mostly gems and jewelry, items similar to the ones you're looking at right now. The museum has been trying to recover them. They say that more than 600 artifacts are back in the museum and another 100 have been identified. It's better than they expected. The museum even displayed some of the recovered gems as part of a wider collection. That's the update on the stolen gems and jewelry. But the other news is less optimistic. 350 artifacts had parts removed from them, things like the gold mounts for gems. This was likely stolen, melted, and then sold off. So there's almost a zero chance of recovery here. As for the 140 damaged artifacts, not much can be done. They will bear the scars forever. That's an overview of the recovery efforts. It was one part of the British Museum's response to the theft. The other part was an inquiry. And here's what they found during the investigation. The British Museum has admitted that it broke the law. There is a law called the Public Records Act 1958. It's about preserving things of public value. This includes the artifacts in museums. All museums in the UK are obligated to meet basic standards of preservation, access, and professional care. Let's look at those words again. Preservation and professional care. Obviously, the British Museum failed in its duty. It allowed priceless heritage to get stolen. Therefore, it has broken the law. What are the consequences for this breach? Well, normally, there's a risk that the collection will be transferred to another institution or to Britain's National Archives. That's the punishment a normal place would face. But this is the British Museum we are talking about. It's infamous for its impunity. And even though the museum broke the law, it now expects to get away scot-free. So that is the headline. Once again, the British Museum walks away without facing any real consequences. They will say their sorries, promise it won't happen again, and then get back to business as usual. But that should not be the case. The rest of the world needs to start applying pressure. We've seen the failure of the British Museum. Its aura of invincibility has been broken. It has shown that it's the same as our museums. So we might as well have our heritage where we can regularly access it, back home, where it belongs. Our next story tonight comes from Africa. The continent has declared a public health emergency over Mpox. This is a highly infectious disease. It was once called monkeypox. If left untreated, Mpox can be deadly, and Africa knows it. Since the beginning of this year, more than 14,000 cases and more than 500 deaths have been recorded in the continent. 96% of these cases come from a single country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. But now the disease is spreading across Central and East Africa at an alarming rate. Nations are worried that the virus might cross international borders. Here's a report.
Africa is on edge. It's fighting a highly infectious disease. Mpox, what was formerly known as monkeypox. The African Union has declared a public health emergency.
I declare with a heavy heart, but with an unyielding commitment to our people, to our African citizens, we declare Mpox as public health emergency of continental security in Africa.
Mpox belongs to the same family of viruses as smallpox. It spreads through close contact with someone who's infected, through skin-to-skin contact, or even by breathing closely. This could be from animals to humans or between people. Mpox usually has mild symptoms like fever and muscle aches, which is why it can go unidentified. But the clearest and most severe symptom of Mpox is this: lesions all over the body. If left untreated, Mpox can be deadly. So far, 2 main strains of the virus are known to exist. In 2022, we saw the milder strain in action. There was a global outbreak and it affected more than 70 countries, including the US, Australia, and several European countries. And now we're witnessing the second strain at play. It's much more deadly and it's causing devastation in Africa. But more than 96% of all cases are in a single country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is where the newly discovered variant was found. And since the beginning of the year, more than 13,700 cases have been recorded in the DRC and 450 people have died. A large number of these deaths are among children.
130 suspected cases have arrived here, and of these 50% are among children less than 5 years old. Up to the age of 18, that's 95% of the cases. So you can see that the over 18s are just 5%.
What makes the situation worse is the speed at which Mpox is spreading. It has alarmed experts, and researchers say that the virus is quickly evolving and therefore spreading faster. Now the virus has spread to other African countries, including Burundi, the Central African Republic, Kenya, and Rwanda. So far, there have been more than 14,000 cases and 524 deaths in total. But experts say the situation is much worse.
The evidence we have on the number of cases, the number of deaths, they are just the tip of the iceberg. And the reason is that Mpox is largely a mild condition. We have limited surveillance. We have limited capacity to do the testing that's required. We have limited capacity to do the contact tracing and the reporting.
But surveillance and testing are not the only problems. So is treatment. 3 vaccines can help cure Mpox. They're not widely available in Africa. So only people at risk or those who have come in close contact with an infected person are usually able to receive them. This is a multifold problem, and the fear is that the virus might spill across international borders.
For our last story tonight, let's stay with Africa. In Kenya, life seems to be returning back to normal. The protests have died down. The war against contentious tax plans is still on, though. At least in Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, where residents are hissing in frustration over a new bill which proposes a so-called tax in the city. Now, even the word tax raises the hackles in Kenya. But this bill is being seen as catastrophic. And Nairobians have their claws out. Now, in case if you missed all of these puns there, we let the cat out of the bag. We're talking about a cat tax in Nairobi. That's what it's being called. Technically, it's not a tax. It is a feline levy for pet owners, so to speak. And how much is it? 200 Kenyan shillings. That's just about $1.50. That is the annual fee. But the anger is not about the money. It's about the extensive list of demands. Cat owners will have to register their pets, get an annual license, pay the $1.50, show proof of rabies vaccination, and keep their cats' behavior in check. Now, we all know how cats love taking instructions from humans. But Kenyan cats will have to make an exception because owners are expected to ensure that cats do not scream too much. They don't cry too much, don't disturb the peace of residents, and remain confined when they're on heat. This country faces political turmoil, fiscal troubles, high-level corruption, food insecurity, devastation from regular droughts and deluge, and yet this is Nairobi's big worry at the moment: cats on heat. It sounds bizarre, but the government remains undeterred. They want to keep the high population of cats in check. Nairobi's feline population is not known, but they really are everywhere, and they contribute to 2,000 deaths from rabies every year in the country. So the Nairobi County does have a point, but the residents are livid nonetheless. They had hoped for better cat welfare in the city. Instead, they may have to pay taxes. They were once burned with tax plans, now they are twice angry. And they're citing a number of problems. Critics say the law will be tough to enforce, too restrictive for cats, and involve a tedious process and costs, which will force many owners to abandon their pets. This will defeat the purpose of the bill. So will Nairobi go ahead with it? Well, we'll find out in a few weeks. But if they do choose to bell the cat and introduce the so-called cat tax bill, Kenya will join a hall of fame of weird tax collectors. Who else is part of this exclusive club? Well, it is a long list. Italy has what's called the sunshine tax. If you want to dine under the Italian sun, you must pay an additional fee. That is the tax. Canada has a vacant home tax. If you underuse your house, you must pay extra for it. Meanwhile, Denmark plans to tax burps. Don't worry, not human burps. Otherwise, some people would be heavily charged. You know who you are. But this will be a cow flatulence tax to curb methane emissions from cows. It will be imposed from 2030. So that's a weird tax of the future. What about the past? In the 18th century, Russia had a beard tax, where men had to pay a tax to keep their facial hair. 17th through 19th centuries, England, France, and Ireland had a window tax. The greater the number of windows, the higher the tax. To avoid it, people began bricking up their windows, which is why many old homes in Europe still have this twisted aesthetic. Now, that is one way to deal with taxes: shut the world out. But I guess today we can try laughing away the misery, because all taxes are painful, but some are also absurd. Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Indian President Draupadi Murmu meets the Indian Olympics contingent at the Rashtrapati Bhavan. In Afghanistan, the Taliban marks the 3rd anniversary of its return to power, and archaeologists find human remains from around 3,800 years ago in Peru. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1947, British India was partitioned in two countries, India and Pakistan. The partition on religious lines led to the displacement of 15 million people. It was the biggest migration in human history. The ensuing violence also killed over 1 million people. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
सचिव सबसे पहले उसके बाद प्रथम रो में बैठे हुए 9 प्रस्थान कर सकते हैं। आप सभी से अनुरोध है,
बट फिर भी फाइनल के लिए क्वालिफाई नहीं कर पाया। बट
طول أقوام أو أفغانان سر متحد
محسن الجوان وأظهر أسباب محاربة خارجية